Wonderful. Okay. Well, in the interest of timekeeping, we'll go and get started. So, firstly, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to give you a very warm welcome on behalf of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the UK. Thank you for joining us for this afternoon's session, which is on the topic of transparent decarbonisation for maximum climate impact. Just as a quick disclaimer, today's session will be recorded. So we're really pleased to be holding this session with Chamber Member ClimateTrade, which is a blockchain-based climate pioneer aiming to empower large-scale decarbonisation through constant innovation. The ClimateTrade marketplace allows companies to offset their climate impact by purchasing carbon, plastic, and biodiversity offsets, as well as renewable energy certificates directly from project developers. The ClimateTrade API, widget, and white label allow clients to integrate marketplace functionalities into their own platform, making their products climate positive. So I'll just start off by introducing our three expert speakers for today's session. So firstly, we're joined by Kat O'Brien, who is ClimateTrade's Head of Partnerships. She joined in July after 3 years at MasterCard in New York, where she was Director of Product Management. Kat has been working in the fintech space since 2015, first at Samsung Pay, leading marketing partnerships with financial institutions, and then at the Barcelona startup Polaroo as CMO. We're also joined by Roberto Carton, who is ClimateTrade's Head of Sales for the UK, Ireland, and Nordics. With more than 20 years of experience in global tech sales and management, Roberto is a spirited leader and effective data-driven capabilities, always looking to intelligently exploit data and improve how organizations deliver for their customers. And then finally, we're joined by Alejandro Rodriguez, who is ClimateTrade's Head of Supply. His previous experience include roles at South Pole and Climate Care, which have given him technical knowledge in climate change mitigation projects and payment for environmental service schemes. Together with his business development experience and capacity, his career has allowed him to engage and network with corporates, government institutions, and NGOs working on sustainability issues. So following the presentations from the three speakers this afternoon, we will have time for a Q&A session. But if you do have any questions throughout the talks, please do feel free to add them to the chat or the Q&A function below, and then we will have time to address them at the end. So now, without further ado, Kat, I'll hand over to you.
Hey everybody, thank you for being here today. And I'm saying hello today from New York. And then next week I will be in Egypt at COP27. So we really appreciate your being here with us and the chance to share a little bit about COP27 and how we can work together to shift from ambition to action. And I think, Rebecca, you can slide ahead here. Perfect. So just wanted to talk to you a little bit, for those of you not familiar with COP, it's the maximum climate conference in the world, brings together through the United Nations, many governments, many businesses, many climate and environmental companies and NGOs around the world. So it's really a super important conference, and we'll look to see if there will be any new laws and regulations that may come out. Aside from that, it's a great chance for entities in this space to connect and find ways to collaborate, sales opportunities, to learn from one another. So we as a company, as ClimateTrade, and I've been here since June, but the company is about 5 years old and has been a participant in COP since 2018. Some of our expectations, and we'll have a number of people that are participating, including our CEO, Fran Benedito, our COO, Ana Karen Zapata, myself, and others. Some of our expectations that these are certainly well beyond ClimateTrade, but just some of the things that we're thinking about is that ICVCM and core carbon principles should be reaffirmed as the way forward for voluntary carbon markets. there's been a huge growth, and there's an ongoing dramatic growth in the voluntary carbon markets. In fact, we're anticipating the growth to go from, it was 200 something million in 2020 up to $1 billion last year, and we're anticipating that being at $30 billion US within a few years. So there's just a dramatic interest. Some of this is coming from customers and individuals who are pressing their companies that they buy from because they want to be more sustainable. Some of it's the companies doing so on their own. And then just a kind of a wellspring around the world of interest in being more sustainable. Biodiversity is another rising topic. And that's something that goes beyond carbon markets, thinking of how we can protect the biodiversity, the individual species, be it animal or plant, and their role within carbon markets and climate action. There's actually a biodiversity summit taking place here, and participation both at COP and later the following month in Montreal. Loss and damage is another hot issue. So this is kind of a newer issue, at least of getting significant attention. How will wealthier countries who are responsible for most of the CO2 output, how will they help pay for damages caused in poorer countries? You look at some of the countries, particularly around the equator, countries such as, say, India or the Philippines or Nigeria, or really most of Africa, Caribbean countries that are dramatically impacted by climate change, whether from hurricanes, from flooding, droughts, etc. However, for the most part, they've contributed very little of the CO2 that's impacting the atmosphere. So will there be some compensation coming from wealthier countries, such as the UK, Spain, the United States, given where all of us are joining from for the most part? Countries should be reaffirming their commitment to climate and sustainability despite geopolitical turmoil. This is obviously a challenging moment given the role that Russia and even Ukraine plays with regards to providing supply energy to the world and to Europe in particular. Nevertheless, we don't have time to waste because we're already passing limits that had been put into place for if we don't pass this temperature limit, or if we do pass this temperature limit, we won't be able to prevent dramatic climate impact. So I think we can go to the next slide. So there are a few different things. Well, there will be many things happening at COP, but one area we wanted to take a look at is Article 6, and to discuss, we're hoping that there will be more clarity on the registration of nationally determined contributions. So that gets to what I was just speaking about in terms of contributions from wealthy countries, poorer countries, and how carbon trading may play into that. So if there will be more of a discrete measurement attached to what each country is contributing. We're hoping that countries will clarify how to use internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, or ITMO. And we expect that there will be significant negotiations around the taxing of carbon credit transactions. Will there be a tax put into place? Will there be a surcharge if you are using more than a certain amount of CO2, emitting more than a certain amount of CO2? I think that that's definitely something I anticipate seeing in the future. It may or may not happen in the next couple of years, but in the future, there will be limits most likely placed on businesses, individuals, countries, regions, on how much CO2 they can emit. We're even in the US, we're already seeing limits around water usage in certain parts of the country. So this is just another natural resource that is threatened, and that we need to monitor and keep a control of in order to not completely damage the planet. And I think, is there one more slide? How may this impact companies? And I'm sure this is what's top of mind for any of you who might be joining. Regulatory clarity will be really important for companies who are looking to refine their ESG strategy. It's extremely difficult to make a plan around sustainability, around ESG, without knowing what the laws are going to be 3 months from now, 12 months from now, 2 years from now. Of course, that there will always be changes, but having some clarity around what's coming down the pike immediately, imminently, will be helpful. And so that's one of the reasons it's so important to see laws and agreements coming out of COP. We expect mandatory carbon reductions to become more stringent. Europe is a leader in this space, but there are certainly differences from country to country, region to region, and we anticipate seeing more of these mandatory carbon reductions or carbon offsets to come into place. In certain countries, there may be regional differences from state or province or region within the country, but we do anticipate this to grow. Another thing that's important for companies is to get familiar with core carbon principles. For those of you who are completely new to this, what does it mean to have scope 1 emissions? What are scope 2 emissions? What are scope 3 emissions? Because if you have a legal requirement or simply your peers are doing more than you don't want to fall behind, understanding where you need to address those emissions and where you can kind of put off for a little bit, or what you would need to do if you were to decide to compensate for scope 2, scope 3 emissions, even if it were not mandatory. But getting familiar with this is important because they're going to standardize the quality of carbon credits in the voluntary market. There are a number of registries that carbon offsets, carbon credits are typically certified through. Some of the best known ones are Verra, Gold Standard, ECS. There may be others that come out, or there may be a more of a global standardization that could happen in the next couple of years. So we're staying very closely attuned to this, and certainly more than happy to share with all of you, via the Chamber's newsletter or whatever the appropriate mechanism might be, because we're working in this space all day, every day, and we don't expect you to have the same time to do that. So, but it is something that's important. And then keep an eye out on biodiversity and how that evolves. We at ClimateTrade just piloted methodology for biodiversity credits earlier this year, but it's a very new space. There is no globally recognized standard. I think that's something that's probably at least a few years away, but it is growing in interest, and I think everyone can appreciate the importance of protecting the biodiversity, because if parts of the Amazon, for instance, are eliminated, there's no way to get those species back. There's no way to protect that biodiversity. And so that's something that is needed around the world, because each region, each location has a very distinct set of species that live there. And so protecting each region is important. It can't just be focused on a certain part of the world. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Roberto. So thank you all for your time, and I'll be around at the end to answer any questions that people may have.
Thank you, Kat, and hello, everyone. My name is Roberto. I'm the head of sales for the UK and Nordics for ClimateTrade. When I meet the customers during the past few months, I noticed that this is quite a new topic that people are really excited about knowing more about sustainability. Some companies, they are perhaps very advanced in the process and they have a good strategy, and other companies are starting the journey. Right? So we want to I want to highlight what we think is a reasonable strategy for you if you are starting this journey, and what you should consider to make sure that your strategy is also strong and valid and solid. So you have to think probably about 2 or 3 steps, but the high level is about basically making sure you calculate your footprint, making sure you set up a reporting and target practice, and in the end you make sure that all of this is cost effective and you focus on reduction. My colleague will talk later about the other alternative, which is offsetting as well for the residual footprint. But basically, when we are looking about measuring your carbon footprint, there is some methodologies that you can leverage, and they are available to you. And one of them, for example, is the GHG protocol, which is the greenhouse gas protocol, which is basically a kind of guidance how companies and organizations should be accounting for these greenhouse emissions and these carbon removals, no matter how they are produced, from the land use or from using energies or any other topic. So basically, that's a strong methodology. Sometimes when you go and we have tools ourselves and solutions ourselves, sometimes when you book a flight today or when you book a hotel, you will see that there's some calculations there that is calculating your footprint. Some of these calculations basically are leveraging this kind of methodologies, you know, of your footprint when you purchase, when you fly, when you travel. And this methodology, you will hear as well that is broken in mainly 3 scopes. And sometimes it can be confusing if you are new to this world of sustainability, but basically there is this scope 1 and 2, which usually you can say that they are those emissions that they are owned or controlled by your company. Yeah. Whereas the scope 3 emissions are those emissions that they are coming from activities that occur from sources not owned and controlled by you. Yeah, and let me explain to you a few examples so it is super clear for you. So you become a black belt on scope 1, 2, and 3. But in scope 1, basically, it covers the emission of you know, those sources, like, for example, when you are burning fuel from your own fleet of vehicles, for example. Yeah, if there are no electrical power. So those, for example, could be your scope 1 emissions. When we are talking about scope 2, are those emissions, for example, when you are buying, you are powering your building, you know, you are purchasing electricity, or you use steam or heat or cooling for your processes or your production processes. Yeah, and that's basically what is the scope 1 and 2, yeah, which I think is, these are pretty clear. And scope 3 tend to be the biggest one, you know, like, and the most difficult one. And many of our customers today, they come to us, to ClimateTrade, to help us to measure, but also to provide solutions, scalable solutions, because scope 3 can be very broad, right? And then they are out of your control. And they can be related, for example, to business travels, right? So when your organization is doing business travel, it can be related to waste disposal, it can be related to purchase of goods and services, yeah, that they happen, you know, any kind of thing, you know, you can think about like employee commuting or capital goods or suppliers, investments, everything falls into this bucket. So that's quite wide, quite big range. And many companies today, they are making a lot of effort to calculate and to do something, right, in scope 3, or to help their ecosystem of suppliers and customers to do something, basically to have visibility and do an action, basically, whether it's reduction or offsetting. Something that you also have to consider once you have knowledge on this scope is basically about the life cycle assessment of your process. And basically, what is this? Is just an evaluation of what is the social and economic impact in the decision making of all your process, sales process or product process, right? So you need to consider all the life cycle, manufacturing, distribution, you know, resources that you are using of your product and services. So that's related to the carbon footprint. And then when we move basically about how do we report and set targets, these are basically, we have listed here the best practices. The best practices is not hiding it, right? That's one of the first advice, but disclose the emissions in an understandable format. And as we discussed before, using a standardized methodology, which is available to the market, like GHG, yeah? And something which is important is like you have a breakdown of those emissions, is a clear breakdown, what are the sources, those scopes and the sources of those emissions, and then you have historical data, so you can also share what is the trend, yeah? Breaking down onto targets, of course, that we mentioned that. And also something which is important is that what you have to do is you have to set benchmarks and you have to set interim targets. If you don't set targets, it will be very difficult for your company to focus. For example, some companies are announcing we are going to be carbon neutral by 2030, right? Which is high level as a company, but then you have to break it down for departments, for the different resources and production lines, basically, so everybody knows what they can do, in their area in order to drive reductions and in order basically to offset if this is the end result to get to net zero. Yeah. Finally, basically, I want to talk about another area, basically, which is about the cost-effective carbon reduction. So in the end of the day, this has to make economic sense for you, your company, and your customers, and it has to be affordable. Driving sustainability will have potentially an increase on the cost of doing business, but also it will give you a differentiation towards the competition, towards the market, and many of the customers want to see align your values or other values of sustainability values in the products and services they are purchasing. So basically one area, it could be calculate the marginal cost of abatement. And what is this basically? This is abatement is the cost that you are incurring as a company, the incremental cost for cleaning your own pollution. Basically the fees required maybe for an oil refinery to clean up its own pollution. So basically you need to make a calculation about what is this, what are you reducing, right? What are you impacting in the environment, and what is this reduction that you are driving? What is the cost of that reduction? And you can also consider as well new trends today, moving to green energy, which is now in some cases cheaper than conventional and more effective. And many companies are installing solar panels on their offices, and they're moving to electrical vehicles. Yeah, looking for ways of optimize and reduce energy efficiency. And something which is important as well that you hear today about this circular economy, a way of recycling, repurposing things, and also don't allowing that, like Kat was saying before, that things go there in the landfill. You know, that you manage also the products, the life cycle of the products that you are selling, and customers can return to you, or they can recycle, or they can repurpose. So once you have learned about this, basically that you must calculate, you must set some targets, and you must consider all these cost-effective ways of reduction, I'm going to transition to my colleague, Alejandro, which is basically an expert on offsetting and how will you offset those residual or remaining emissions that you couldn't reduce. And basically things work differently in the mandatory and the voluntary market, but today we are going to focus only on the voluntary market. So Alejandro, speaker to you.
Thank you, Roberto, and hi everyone. Thanks for the time that you are investing here. So I'm Alejandro, I'm the head of supply of ClimateTrade. I'm based in Colombia, in Medellin to be exact. The idea of this presentation for you is trying to provide input about the voluntary market. How is the voluntary market? What kind of players are working on the voluntary market? Trying to provide to the some tools about how you can identify a good project for moving forward with the offsetting in your company, and try to present to you the importance that have the inclusion of new technologies like blockchain in the transaction in the voluntary market. So as Roberto mentioned, when you have already done the carbon footprint, you could start to managing the different activities that you have in the different scopes for your carbon footprint. The idea is trying to mitigate the emissions that you have in your company, but at the end, you have a residual emissions that you could move forward with the offsetting in order to get the carbon neutral certification, for example, or something like that. If that is the the idea that you have for your company, so you need to start to buy carbon credits in the voluntary market. So actually the voluntary market is a market that allows to the companies try to offset their emission, and buying carbon credits provided by different carbon projects. Those kind of projects, or the different categories that that exists in the carbon market, depend of the different activities that the project proponent are implementing on the field. For example, you can find nature-based solutions, for example, reforestation project that trying to have a quantification of the emissions that the trees are capturing for the increase for their increased process. But you can find RED Plus projects. So actually those kind of projects that for the avoiding deforestation, the implementation of activity for avoiding deforestation in a strategic ecosystem like the Amazon region, for example, or or in Asia, for example. Those kind of projects are developed following the different technical requirements that some carbon standards has in place. For example, BERRA, that in the past was called BCS, so the Verified Carbon Standard, for example, Gold Standard, Plan Vivo. Those are some carbon standards that are available to use for developing a carbon project. And that is a good indicator to identify if that project has a good quality, because those carbon standards have the requirements needed in order to develop those kind of projects. So you need to demonstrate using those kind of methodologies, for example, the additionality of the project. You need to demonstrate the impact that the project is having in the communities involved in the project, for example. So talking about that, that is a good other point that you need to take into account in order to define who is what is the best project to invest for moving forward with the offsetting. Is the other kind of co-benefits associated with the emission reductions. For example, the impact in terms of community aspect for incomes for the different families involved in the project area. When we are talking about nature-based solutions, for example, or the impact for the biodiversity and for the implementation of activities for avoiding deforestation, for example, too, or any other kind of impact related to the communities for the implementation of a new technology for providing renewable energy in some strategic regions around the world, for example, in Africa, in Latin America, or in Asia, for example. So those are some important elements that you need to keep in mind in order to identify the best project to move forward with the offsetting. So those kind of co-benefits, it could be certified too, like the emission reduction using the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, in the case for gold standard, or using other kind of certification like CCB, that is Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standard that the BCS has. And those kind of projects could have the double certification in order to have more co-benefits in terms of the communities or other ecosystem involved in the project, for example. So at the same time, it would be great to mention that we are using blockchain technology in order to move forward with the transaction, because for the carbon market in the past, it was common to identify different gaps in terms of the information available to demonstrate the impacts in terms of the revenues for the communities that are implementing the projects on the field, for example. And the blockchain technology allow us trying to have a tracking about the different flow of the money related to the transaction for carbon credits. And it will be great to mention that the blockchain allow us to have a traceability of the operations and the transaction in real time, in order to get another kind of backup in terms of the to avoid the double accountability. So the carbon standard have as registries as different carbon registry associated, but the blockchain technology allow us to have another kind of backup for the transaction that are doing every day in the carbon market. So this is a little bit overview about the general information that you need to keep in mind in order to identify the best project to move forward with the offsetting. And so, yeah, thank you so much for the time. And I enter with Roberto and Kat for the next session about the case studies.
Thank you, Alejandro. So basically, today you learn about the, the COP27. We told you about the calculation and the targeting and the reduction techniques. Alejandro talked about the offsets as well. And now we want to share with you some of the case of studies, success case of studies that we have within ClimateTrade, and what some of our customers have worked with us in a really smart manner in order to to drive an activity, to drive an action to reduce those emissions. So many of the cases you will see today, they are members of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce, but at the same time they are global companies. So Santander probably is a MasterCard, really big brands, well-known brands. Is a bank also present in the United Kingdom, and MasterCard is a global credit card company. So working with them, basically what we have achieved is that Santander has been able to focus and to provide some new services, differentiation services to their customers. So every time that the Santander customer log in into their web portal app and they do expenditures with the credit cards, they can see a calculation of the footprint in terms of sometimes kilograms, because there is no number of tons. And you can translate this basically, and you can offer to your customer the way of offsetting that carbon footprint with a couple of projects. So, for example, this is the another view of the Spanish website, and then you will see at the bottom that there are 2 projects that the Santander has selected for their customers, following some of the accreditations and SDG goals that Alejandro was mentioning before. And that's what you make available to your customers, and the customers basically they don't mind basically to go there and pay an extra 1.82 euros basically to offset the emissions generated through their credit card purchases. Yeah, so that's a great example, and a great example how can you do something in a scope 3. Yeah. I will show as well another 2 great examples as well in scope 3, which usually are really difficult scope to tackle. And this one is with Cabify. Cabify is like a taxi provider similar to Uber, and is very popular in Spain, but also in Latin America. It's also a global brand. And basically what they have created is a new line of products. They have created a carbon neutral taxi. And as you can see there in the screenshot of their application, you can choose a normal taxi at the X rate. And for a little bit more, you can choose a carbon neutral ride. And that's basically what they work with us. We both of the things that you have seen before, they are using our technology, our APIs, for either calculation and also for offsetting to provide those new services to the customers, and to differentiate as well, and to provide to customers that they care about sustainability this new option. And finally, as well, a very well-known company, Telefónica, which is also present in the United Kingdom. Telefónica uses as well our technology in their marketplace in order to provide or to offer to their customers carbon neutral devices. Any technology devices, TVs, phone, watches, you name it. So whenever you are purchasing from their marketplace, you have the option as well to purchase carbon neutral devices. And many of you will wonder if customers buy. They do, and they choose not in a high percentage because it's also a little bit generational, but many customers, they don't mind to choose all these carbon neutral devices. So it's just a few samples to show you how companies are becoming super clever, super smart, and using sustainability as well to differentiate. And the thing now is about giving information to your customers, providing information, and provide to your customers choices aligned to their preference and to their values. And that's basically what these great companies are doing, and that's why they are pioneering. But this can be used with any company in any industry. Think about flights. We have hotel customers as well. Any industry, all these kind of concepts can be applied. So I think we have got to the end of the presentation, and I hope that this was super valuable to you guys, and you enjoy, and perhaps we teach you something, and we open your curiosity about sustainability, and that things can be done, that you don't need to wait to 20, 30 or 100 years to do something, that there are things today available for to you to drive an action. And I'm going to pass basically the speaker to the moderator, because maybe some of you have some questions during our presentation, and perhaps I hope that we can answer if they are not very difficult, but please place your questions in the chat or the Q&A panel, and then we will try basically to read them out and to answer. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Roberto, Kat, and Alejandro, for sharing such informative presentations. As Roberto just mentioned, we do have some time for any questions that you might have. So if you would like to pop them into the Q&A or the chat function below, I'd be more than happy to see if we can get those answered. Just to get us started, we have had a question here from Michael. What carbon projects are the most exciting to the team, and why?
Yeah, I think that is a question for me. Currently, the most demanding kind of project category that we have is removals project, not only for nature-based solutions, it's for new technologies that are looking for remove emissions from the atmosphere. So because it's not only related to action for avoidance, the impact that we have from the different activities is trying to remove the emission that we have already in the atmosphere. But from my perspective, if we could try to combine remove technology and nature-based solution, that would be great, because you can remove the emissions from the atmosphere, but at the same time you can provide an impact in terms of other kind of issues like ecosystem impact, biodiversity impact, and community impacts, because normally those kind of projects are implemented by different organizations or communities on the field. So from our perspective, trying to get reforestation projects for not for timber productions and just for protections issue, that would be great, and that will be a good option for moving forward. And if those kind of activities involve an strategic ecosystem like mangroves ecosystem, that would be better actually. So for example, that, as I mentioned, that was a strategy ecosystem. So that is my advice from my perspective.
Great, thank you very much, Alejandro. Another question that we've received is carbon neutral the same as net zero? Are the credits for carbon neutral only from removals?
Mm-hmm. Alejandro, you want to take this one?
I think we could try to combine the answer, Roberto, with you. Yeah. But yes, the carbon credits could be used for having an carbon neutrality goals, for example. But in terms of net zero, maybe the organization could try to improve their process in-house in order to achieve the mitigation project as a whole. So Roberto, if you can.
Yeah, I think in my view, I think carbon neutrality, you don't need to wait. You could be carbon neutral if you offset, like we have discussed today, like the examples that we showed you today, carbon neutral devices. You just have to calculate the footprint and offset and invest in a nature-based solution or in a renewable energy solution and offset your footprint. So you achieve carbon neutrality. Net zero, I think for me, is a strategy that we discussed before, that it requires a lot of focus and effort on reduction, circular economy and waste management, and then use offsetting as a resource for this residual part, that this will be smaller and smaller, yeah, along your journey, but you know, you may need to use it for many years. Some companies maybe will become, you know, negative, and you know, they will generate credits in the future, right? But most likely, most of companies no. Then net zero for me is that the strategy that we discussed before, or with a lot of focus on reduction and using offsets for the residual part.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in to Roberto's point just now. There are some companies, a very small percentage of them, but there are some that are actually seeking to be net negative and in fact climate positive. So where they're removing more carbon than they're contributing.
Great, thank you very much. We do have more questions coming in, so I'll just carry on. Another one is, can projects still be registered in the CDM? What will be the future of old projects registered there?
Okay, that is another for me. At this point, it's not possible to get new projects developed under CDN. But the thing that it could possible in the CDN is trying to have a new crediting period. So some projects are, for example, the renewable energy project has 3 crediting periods of 7 years, for example, and it could be possible try to renew that crediting period in the CDN. From my perspective, for the old project already registered in CDN, is try to evaluate if it's possible to migrate that project for the voluntary carbon standard, like BCS or gold standard, if that's possible, if the project start date works for that, and the additionality and the other requirements asked for the voluntary carbon standard, that would be the best option for those kind of projects.
But by the way, just to add to what Alejandro says, for those people who don't know, the acronym CDM is basically the United Nations registry of those projects.
Thank you, Roberto.
Great, thank you. Another question that has come through is, what kind of due diligence do you do on the projects you offer to guarantee their quality?
Yeah, in ClimateTrade, we have a technical team. We have technical experts performing the due diligence process for selecting the project that we have listed in our marketplace. Basically, we try to identify if the different requirements as for the different carbon standard are met in our tools that we have in place, but at the same time we are exploring to have any different ratings for different organizations like Silvera, for example, or something like that, in order to guarantee not only the quality provided by the carbon standard, just also have the other kind of audit or auditing process, for example, or something like that. But another important point to mention that we only not focus in the technical perspective of the project in the due diligence process, because we are interested too in the whole integrity of the project. So for that reason, we are running analysis for the reputation. I'm sorry, for any other kind of bad news or something like that related to the project. We are looking for those kind of information in order to guarantee the quality of the project and reputational aspect too.
Yeah. Just to add to this, at least from our side, if you, for example, access to our marketplace, that's why we use blockchain for traceability and transparency. You will have access to all the documentation and certification and validation reports of each one of the projects that we load in our place, and these are available to you once you join us, right, as a customer. And you can even contact the developer if you have doubts, or you can even go to the register to see where all these projects are registered, so you can see as well the validity of this project, the veracity.
Great, thank you. Another one that we got through is, where is the most additionality in a project?
Additionality.
Additionality. Yeah, actually, additionality is an important part of the project development. So because you need to identify what is the real impact in terms of the project implementation activity that you are having on the field, for example. And that is actually the reason that it's possible to have carbon credits. For example, for nature-based solution, you need to demonstrate, if you are talking about avoidant project like REDD+ project, you need to demonstrate that the project is additional, because there are different deforestation drivers in the project area, for example, and you need to implement project activities to stop those kind of deforestation drivers. So in that case, the project is additional, for example. For reforestation project, you need to demonstrate that in the past the project area was any other kind of ecosystem there, for example, not natural ecosystem, I'm sorry, but you need to demonstrate that area was in a bad situation that you have with the project scenario. That is planting trees in this case, for example. For that additionality, actually, that is the most important topic that you need to identify in the project development.
Great, thank you, Alejandro. Another question that has come through is, Roberto mentioned that it was most important to keep internal targets. What are the best or most successful ways to maintain accountability for progress in a large firm?
So one thing that I would say about that is, first of all, just measuring it, because if you don't know what the impact is, it's very hard to make improvements or to have accountability. So having some sort of measurements, targets, knowing what you're starting from, what your objectives are, and then you can do that across departments or different areas within the company. Another thing that can be helpful to drive improvement is to have some sort of incentives. You know, in my previous company, MasterCard, there was a big focus on, and a growing focus on, sustainability, and they actually built it into senior executives' bonuses. Each year, a portion of their bonus was tied to making progress towards goals and objectives around sustainability. So of course, it's going to look different from company to company, but I would say keeping track, having some sort of measurement system and knowing what you're working towards. And then to the extent that you can have either sticks or carrots or a combination thereof, that can help incentivize people.
Yeah, I will agree with Kat. And I will add that also, you guys, if you are in sustainability, everybody plays a key role today on educating the others, because as you are here today, it is a new subject, super new. There is so many new terminologies and things. And also our leadership, they need those methodologies, not just launch that we are going to be net zero in 2030, right? But also help, you know, with those targets in the how, you know, and listen to the people, consulting, looking these different options, working with the ecosystem and with partners like us to figure out how do you reduce, how do you optimize, how do you offset, how do you decarbonize, all these kind of amazing things. And the great thing is such a relevant topic today that you can go very high in the company and it can give you a lot of exposure today. So we have conversations, Kat and myself, when we go around the world, and we talk really to CEOs of companies, to governments. Everybody's really interested, and people really want to know what can be done today, actionable things, and what is been happening, what is being built for the future.
And I just wanted to share, because I think this is particularly relevant for this group. I just had my first mandatory carbon offsetting as an individual. Well, I would have if I had entered the lottery for the London Marathon, and they had a mandatory offset if you were traveling from outside the UK. Unfortunately, I actually didn't have it because my name was not drawn, but that was the first time that I had anything I was trying to purchase where there was as an individual, there was a mandatory carbon offset. So I thought that was interesting, and that the UK was at the forefront there.
And something that I don't want to forget, share your targets as well publicly, and share it with your ecosystems as well. Demand also the same to your suppliers as well, and put new policies in place that suppliers that need to have that strategy to get to net zero, to become carbon neutral, as we were discussing as well, as part of your process, basically. And perhaps you also will need to recruit people as well, or talent as well, that have this knowledge as well. So think about something new. Like anything new, you have to build it, basically.
Great. I think we have time for one or two more questions. I've got a great one here. How do you recommend trying to calculate the carbon footprint of a globally dispersed remote team? Scope 1 emissions of our remote team has seemed very hard to calculate.
Okay. I can try to answer, and my team can support me on this. But if you're talking about scope 1 and 2, we have tools and calculators developed for you, basically, in order to do this. So we can help you with that. And we have many companies that do this, but we have a calculation team to help you. We can even help you to calculate events, which are things that they don't happen regularly. But scope 1 and 2, I think, are pretty simple. Scope 3, it needs further analysis and further exploration about how do you produce, which suppliers do you buy from. But the scope 1 and 2 is your own activities, which usually you are going to have the data already, right? How much petrol you consume, this and that, how much energy your buildings you use in your buildings. This information lives today within your company, and you just have to put it in the calculator, and then you will get your carbon footprint. So this is very easy for scope 1 and 2. And for scope 3, it requires to work with a partner to help you in that process, and it could take a little bit longer. I hope I answered the question correctly. If Alejandro and Kat wants to say something else.
I think that's great. Thanks.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. Those are all the questions that we've had in for this session. I do just want to reiterate, if any of you have any other questions, whether that's today or in the coming days or weeks, you can see the contact details of all of our speakers on the PowerPoint right there. But I will also, following this session, be sending a follow-up email, which will include a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as their contact details again. So please do feel free to reach out to them if you have any other questions, and also share the link to the recording with a colleague or anyone that you think it might be of use to. I'd just like to give a final thank you to all of our speakers from ClimateTrade for sharing such informative presentations. And thank you to everybody for the great questions at the end and for joining us for this session. It's been a pleasure to hold this webinar with you all at ClimateTrade, and we hope to see all of the attendees, at any of the future chamber events that we're holding in the coming months. Yeah, thank you again, everyone, and have a great evening. And
thanks to the chamber for having us. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you and to present to everybody. So look forward to, please feel free to reach out, anyone who is on the webinar and interested in learning more.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, please do feel free to reach out to any of the speakers. And you'll also have a chamber email that you can get to if you have any questions from our side too.
Yeah, perfect. And then in the future as well, after the COP27, perhaps we will discuss to do a follow-up as well to inform you about new trends or new news as well. Thank you, guys.
Fantastic. Take care, everybody. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah.